Hey, Good Friday to you. This is Good Friday, the Friday we celebrate the death of, or think about the death of Jesus, and then a couple days from now, on Easter Sunday morning, we're going to celebrate Easter. So this is Walking Through the Word, and my name is Todd. Today we're going to be reading Matthew chapter 27, verses 1 through 56. A lot of reading today, but we're going to cover a lot of ground regarding the death of Jesus. Let's get started here. Verse 1 of chapter 27 of Matthew says this: Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people made their plans how to have Jesus executed. So they bound him and led him away and handed him over to Pilate the governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse, and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and to the elders. "I have sinned," he said, "for I have betrayed innocent blood." "What is that to us?" they replied. "That's your responsibility." So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself. The chief priests picked up the coins and said, "It is against the law to put this money into the treasury, since it is blood money." So they decided to use the money to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. That is why it is called the field of blood to this day. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. They took 30 pieces of silver, the price set on him by the people of Israel, and they used them to buy the potter's field as the Lord commanded. This prophecy, this fulfilled a prophecy that was happened many years ago by the prophet Jeremiah, where Jeremiah had prophesied this thing about the potter's field. So everything here in the Bible, in the New Testament, has a lot of fulfillment about prophecies that happened in the Old Testament, and this is just another example. We don't have time to go into it today. When we go through the book of Matthew in detail, we'll spend more time on that prophecy. Let's continue on. Verse 11 says this: Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even a single charge. Not even a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, Which one do you want me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas, or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he knew it was out of their self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus who is called Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood is on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he handed Jesus over to be flogged and handed him over to be crucified. You'll notice that Pilate was a people pleaser. He was out to please the people. He saw Jesus was innocent. He was like, "Why are we, wanting to crucify this guy? He's an innocent guy." But the people wanted him crucified, and it was stirred up naturally from the religious leaders. So you can see that Pilate was pleasing people rather than doing what was right. Verse 27. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole country of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff on his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head, and again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put on his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to be crucified. If you remember what we read yesterday, the religious leaders had earlier beaten him, and then now the Roman soldiers are beating him too. So Jesus has received several beatings. Sometimes we get this all we think is just one time, but no, this is several times this has happened. Verse 32, as they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. Now this would be, the cross had the upright post that was mounted there at the place all the time usually. And then you had the crossbeam, and that was tied to the prisoner usually, and then they had to carry that. Naturally, that would be a hard, heavy piece to carry, especially after being beaten and your back is all raw. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then they twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him and said, "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him and took a staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put on his clothes on him, and they led him away to be crucified. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. Verse 33, they came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. There they offered Jesus wine to drink, mixed with gall. But after tasting it, he refused to drink it. When they crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots, and sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head, they placed the written charge against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. There, when you crucified someone, they would use nails similar to this. You can see that there. About this size, realistically, not a little finish nail. What they would do is they would crucify you, and they would put this usually like in your wrist area right here. If they put it here, what would happen is they would just tear through. So this was able to hold you up more. So they would put this, you'd be nailed across, and then they nailed this into both feet, and then onto it was a small piece of wood there. What happened when you were crucified was that nail went into your feet, and because of the way you were hanging, stretched out like this, it was hard for you to breathe, and you could only breathe by pushing yourself up with your feet onto up high enough to catch that breath, to breathe. And so you'd push yourself up and catch a breath, and then you'd go down. And so you were constantly pushing yourself up and down on feet that had, the nail through it. So definitely a lot of pain, of course. So you were bleeding, but eventually you would die from asphyxiation because of you couldn't breathe anymore because you were just too weak to lift yourself up. So it would be constant up and down, up and down. This could last for days, the people that were crucified. And it would go on, for days. And they would crucify you along a busy road because they wanted to make examples of people so that you would do the same crime. So they would crucify you along the busy road, and they would crucify you naked. So it was shameful. There was no little cloth to cover you up or anything. You were crucified naked beside the road. There's a movie we had watched. It's a true story about slaves that had revolted during the Roman time. And they ended up being captured, and they were crucified also. And they stretched, it was miles and miles long of, every few feet, someone was crucified, someone was crucified, someone was crucified. So they did this to Jesus. They crucified him and he was expected. Normally, they would die after a few days there, but the Jewish religious leaders were in a rush to get this over with because they didn't want a body hanging there over the Sabbath or over a religious holiday. So what would happen then is the soldier would come and break their legs. If you break their legs, they can't be pushing up and down anymore. And so they would die quickly. But Jesus had already passed away at that point, and so they just stabbed his side. Which, again, is a fulfillment of prophecy that not a bone would be broken. Okay. Let's keep reading here. Verse 38, 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads, and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself, come down from the cross. If you are the Son of God," in the same way the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" In the same way, the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. The rebels on either side. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of them standing there heard this, they said, "He's calling Elijah." Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar and put it on a staff and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him." And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. I won't even get in today to how big that curtain was, that it would have taken teams and teams of oxen to actually pull that thing apart if they wanted it pulled apart. That's the curtain, of course. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was a man of God." Many women were there watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. As we see here from this passage, it's Jesus is basically left alone. Everyone has left him. We saw that yesterday. But we see here the graphic description of how he was crucified, how he was killed, how he was abandoned. And this was all done. This was God's plan. God allowed this to happen, to die for our sins. I deserve to be on that cross. All of us have deserved to be killed for our sins, die for our sins. Romans 3:23 says, "For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." All of us have sinned, and all of us deserve death. It says, "For the wages of sin is death." So we all deserve this, but Jesus has taken our place and died for us. So that's a conclusion for today. Jesus did this for us. He died for us. Lord's blessing to you. I encourage you today. Today is Good Friday. Spend some time with your family. Read over this passage again. You could read from Luke or John also. And then spend time today taking communion together, celebrating, honoring Jesus' body and blood with the bread and grape juice or wine. Lord's blessing to you. We'll see you tomorrow as we continue our journey during this Holy Week.